find that what we're doing at Faith and Public Life, in terms of reclaiming this public voice of social justice, faith, is actually reinvigorating the church as well. It's a form of evangelism in a way, not trying to get people to believe as we do, but actually reclaiming the brand of Christianity that has been dragged through the mud. So that might be another way you can get some more people on board with what you're doing here, because it's all interrelated. We know that the real gospel is Luke chapter 4, right? I've come to bring good news to the poor. It's not other things that people said that it is. So this obviously has been the voice of faith in recent years. And what we've been working to do is reclaim it. Robert Raven was saying earlier how important communications is. It used to be that if you didn't have money for communications or whatever, you were working in policy, you might just forgo that piece. Obama recently was meeting with some National Council of Churches leaders, and he literally said to them, if it didn't happen on CNN, it didn't happen. And they could have taken offense at that. That's kind of irritating to hear that. No, you're the president, do something about this. But in a sense, he's right. In today's media environment, the media defines our reality, unfortunately. So if there's a tree that falls in the wilderness and no one's here to see it, did it happen? No, it didn't happen. And so for politicians today, so much of what goes into their making up their mind is how, of course, their constituencies feel, but if their constituencies don't know they're doing it, how's their constituency going to be upset about it, right? So it has to be in the news, and you have to have a media strategy. Today's pulpit, I would like to say to those who aren't interested in Black church or social justice Christianity, today's pulpit is CNN and the blogosphere, right? Before this media era and this environment that we live in today, people used to get their news and their thoughts and their opinions from church and from the pulpit, and from talking to one another in their communities. Today, we're so informed by the media. So, consider CNN your pulpit. So I'm going to talk briefly about 6 strategies to keep in mind as you're thinking about a communication strategy. And we're a small shop at Faith and Public Life, but we've been able to actually bring back to a large extent a lot of the progressive faith voice and do that at key moments that tip the political balance. And we've been able to do this with very few resources. So I hope these will give you a sense of hope and empowerment about what you actually can do with very little. Just an aside, I'm really excited right now about what's happening in North Carolina with Reverend Barbara and NAACP. So one of the things I want to talk about is just scale. Reverend Barbara has figured out a way to bring a coalition together and take marches to the street to contest what's happening there in North Carolina. But sometimes we don't always have scale. A lot of times we have our historic voice and political relevance. Faith and Public Life knew during the healthcare reform debate that the Christian right was going to try to use the issue of abortion and was going to try to work through the Tea Party to tank healthcare reform and tank that effort. So August 09, Tea Party was throwing a bunch of parties around the country. Support for healthcare reform was going down. We organized a call-in with President Obama and faith leaders, drew faith leaders from all the key swing states on that piece of legislation, and shifted the media narrative after the Tea Party had dominated the media cycle for 3 weeks, shifted it into the moral case for healthcare reform. And then during the final weeks before passage of that bill, there's a lot of rumors about how healthcare reform was going to fund abortion. The Catholic Church was against it. A lot of Catholic Democrats didn't want to vote for the bill. We had been watching this very carefully, knew this was coming down, and we had organized a number of voices within the Catholic community to be able to speak in support of the bill at the last minute to win the support of Catholic Democrats. And we were able to get these spokespeople out on the airwaves, and the Democrats in Congress that were holding out for that bill and not voting for it actually voted for it because the nuns were able to come out and support and others. And so we were able to actually swing support of that bill in a positive direction. To use another example from the Catholic community, which we've done a lot of work with in the past year, had Paul Ryan advocating for a seriously draconian budget. And he's made a couple of mistakes along the way, which have enabled us for very little money just to take advantage of all the things that he said where he slipped up At one point, he actually quoted Catholic social teaching and said, "My budget is supported by Catholic social justice teaching on this issue." We caught him saying that, put that video online, pushed some voices out there to speak counter to him, suggested that reporters actually call the bishops' conference for comment. Say, is this true? Does Paul Ryan's budget actually is it supported by Catholic social teaching? To which they had the answer, no, absolutely not. It's not a question they really wanted to answer at the time. They were more focused on other issues, but they had to answer it, and that became a big news story. And then Paul Ryan, in this middle screen here, he went to speak at Georgetown University. And Father Tom Reese, who's been at Georgetown for a while, was courageous in working with us to organize a sign-on letter. That took several hours of our time, but no money. We put that out to press. It won him a spot on the Colbert Show and many other national news networks. This is one of the funniest things I've ever seen Colbert do. And I sat there watching it thinking, God, when I was in high school growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, if only I had been able to see this as the face of religion. If you Google Father Tom Reese, Colbert, you'll just laugh your head off. It's a long interview, actually. He spent like 20 minutes on it. Another tactic that we've used a lot is simply timeliness. I have to say, I was doing civil disobedience here with a group of mainline Protestant colleagues who often don't get much news coverage these days. Let's face it, they run these Washington, D.C. offices that aren't very strategic in terms of media or politics in a way, but they picked an opportune moment during the debt ceiling debate remember how tired we were of the debt ceiling debate, right? Those cameras were rolling for like 2 weeks straight, focused on that debate. And what happened is, people do civil disobedience a lot, or here and there. It often doesn't get picked up as it should by the news. But in this case, this was very timely because the news cameras needed something else to focus on, and this provided a great spectacle for them. And so this was like on the 5th page of the New York Times, all over the news for 2 weeks. I know because my conservative relatives were very upset with me. Apparently, I was the first one being arrested, so that went all through the South and to every relative I ever had. Some of them still aren't speaking to me. So here is a hunger coalition that we worked with, and in this case, we helped them tell a compelling story. They often, every year, they would do this food stamp challenge, which is a great idea, like live on food stamps for $31.50 a week. And they always did this news conference on Capitol Hill. It had a nice ring to it. We said, no, don't do it on Capitol Hill. There's press conferences on Capitol Hill every day. Go to the grocery store with members of Congress. You guys take the commitment and let the reporters follow you around as you cook your meal. In this case, it was a rabbi who was getting ready for his Shabbat meal, Sabbath meal.
Cory Booker as well.
And look at the look on his face. What's that?
Cory Booker as well, right?
Oh, yeah. I think Cory was involved with that, yeah. So just a shift in location. Use compelling visuals. We wanted to draw support to Occupy Wall Street and show, this was back when people were talking about how it was just an anarchist crazy movement, and we wanted to show moral support for that movement and also brand it as a moral issue, make sure people were talking about it on moral terms, not just economic terms. So we picked the symbol of the golden calf. We found a church that was willing to carry it to Wall Street. We speculated, are people even going to understand what this symbol means? Thanks to Monty Python, I think they know a lot more about the Bible than we thought they did. They recognized it immediately. We made this calf out of chicken wire and yard signs and paper mache. So, cost no money. We just had to put it in a van, take it up to New York. The amazing thing about this, you guys as clergy will really appreciate this. We did not know. We should have known this. I should have known this. But the lectionary text that Sunday was Exodus 24. So talk about putting together like the pastoral and the prophetic. The church that carried this calf to Wall Street, Judson Memorial, which is right there in Washington Square, Donna Scopper there preached this amazing sermon with the golden calf up front on the altar, flowers all around, unusual worship flowers. Pastoral talked about people in the congregation losing their jobs and being afraid to talk about it with each other. Prophetic, we're going to march to Wall Street, come join us after the service. Carried that down. That calf went all over the world, and calves were built in several major cities around this country. And one religion news reporter called it the iconic image of Occupy Wall Street. So just for making showed you what we did with Catholics to take on Paul Ryan. We've been giving him grief for like a year and a half, just like dogging him on this tendency he has to use Catholic social teaching in a negative way and misrepresent the faith. So that eventually culminated in Nuns on the Bus. How many of you heard about Nuns on the Bus this past summer? So a bunch of nuns were censured by the Pope. We were like, what are we going to do about this? How can we help them? The Catholic Church was meanwhile declaring a fortnight for religious freedom to focus on its opposition to contraception and healthcare reform. All crazy stuff happening in the Catholic Church. We helped them come up with this campaign to take to the roads for 2 weeks on a bus through the Midwest to address the Ryan budget. And it was just such a funny concept. Like, we debated the name for a long time of what we're going to call this tour. But Nuns on the Bus, I mean, you just can't get funnier than that, right? Like, and it plays on sort of all the old sort of notions about nuns, but in a respectful way. See if this sound will work. Huh. Sound button somewhere. Sorry. That sounded good.
Actually, what I'll admit is that we're faithful to the gospel. We work every day to live as Jesus did in relationship with people. What I'll admit is that we're faithful to the gospel. We work every day to live as Jesus did in relationship with people at the margins of our society. That's all we do.
That's a cheap applause line. Jesus. You can throw Jesus into anything and people are going to applaud. Well, you've got a bus tour coming up starting this Thursday, okay? You guys, you and some other nuns, I'm guessing? A bunch of nuns are getting on a bus?
Right.
That's a movie right there. Okay? Nuns on a bus. And you guys are going to go to nine different states?
9 states.
To different places where nuns are doing
Great work, and we're going to lift up their work, but we're also stopping at congressional offices, especially of Congress people who voted for the House budget proposed by Congressman Ryan. And that budget undermines the whole fabric of our society. And people don't know it. We want to educate people about what's going on in Congress and make sure that they push back against hijacking our nation.
Well, now, do you realize...
It's the least we can do for people who are suffering in this economy, that are left out, that are pushed to the margins.
But if we're just concentrating on the poor, helping the poor, that leaves the rich out. Guys like me...
That's what the rich should be doing.
No, listen, we need more help. The poor shall inherit the kingdom, right, of heaven. A camel can get through the eye of a needle more than a rich man can get into heaven. I need help more than a poor person does.
You need help to respond, to be generous, because, there's enough to go around if we would only share. It's this American ideal that we should just hoard and hold on to the individual things that we have.
Jesus himself said, I got mine, Jack.
Jesus broke the bread and gave it to everybody and said, eat and be filled. And there was enough if you share.
Well, I'm not going to debate the gospel with a nun. That's not fair. Sister, thank you so much for joining me. The head of Network, a National Catholic Social Justice Lobby, Sister Simone Campbell. We'll be right back. Thank you, Sister.
So we've done a lot of work with Catholics because there are a lot of misbehaving Catholics right now. But I think Catholics, in a lot of ways, are similar to the African American community, that there's just long political tradition of working on social justice issues and a political experience that shapes how the news tends to see that community. And so it's also a dynamic that I think the African American and the Black church tradition can really draw on, that long history there. And again, the ability to use humor and creativity. The nuns were really in a pickle. They were afraid they were going to lose their entire organization. They were actually on their last dime. They had very little money left in the bank, quite honestly. and were really struggling organizationally, and they decided to do something really bold with that and really positive. They didn't sort of fight the Pope head on. They decided to stay on their message and really be prophetic about what it is they wanted to see happen in America. The last sort of example is just using strange bedfellows alliances. And I think Robert Raven was referring to this earlier in terms of who you team up with and what kind of issues you take on. In the case of immigration reform, we were working in Alabama where there's been one of these really horrific laws impacting immigrant communities. And we wanted a spokesperson who was atypical and who would be able to swing support from people who weren't on board with dismantling this terrible law that was restricting the rights of immigrants. And so we chose a white Southern Baptist pastor to make a rather non-traditional argument and ran this ad.
We believe in reaching out and ministering in our community. Yet under Alabama's immigration law, we could be prosecuted for following God's call to be good Samaritans. Farmers' crops are rotting in the fields because there aren't enough workers for the harvest. Teachers are forced to act like immigration agents instead of educators. The new law hurts children and families and doesn't reflect the values of our faith. Call your legislators today. You can make a difference.
Really bold Baptist pastor. He had never done this kind of activism before and was willing to lend his voice in this way. And I think was able to rally a lot of support and sort of shift public opinion. The other thing I like about that is just using the unique role that faith communities play on an issue. They're at the front lines. You don't think of like how this is going to impact the church. So regardless of like where you are with immigration, it makes even conservative Alabamans stop and think. I think about what they're doing, and sort of leads them into the issue in a very non-threatening way, so that we can then bring them further down the road. So those are a few of the tactics we have used. Very few of those cost really any money, except for the ad here, which we got foundation dollars to help sponsor. But I think it's critical that media strategy match up with the strategy that you're trying to move legislatively. That it's a critical tool for leveraging your power and influence today. We actually at Faith and Public Life, we offer media strategy training, and we also offer message training. So like